Hello world, it's me, Briar. I use they them pronouns and I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love Dungeons and Dragons so much, I am gifting you, or perhaps cursing you, with yet another lore drop on my gods for my homebrew world. Azphyriel is the first goddess that I created for this world specifically. I did not want to erase this whole thing and then rewrite it. So right now, she was formerly part of the New Age Pantheon. I'm going to change the New Age to the Celestial Pantheon, which means I have to rework some of my god papers that I've done in my DM binder. But crying is a free action. So that's a hefty boy. I gotta get new dividers on another paycheck. This one was kind of lean. Anyway, not binders, dividers. That's enough of getting distracted. Which if you're ADHD, there's never enough of getting distracted. Hello, Frere. What have you got? Because I've got you. What do you have to say to the fans? She's like, bitch, you don't have fans. Anyway, so which accurate. Thank you for your wise words of wisdom, my lovely demon co-host. So, the Celestial Pantheon was her former pantheon. She got cast out and put into the Infernal Pantheon. Oh. Her domains are life, due to the previous sphere of influence being healing and mercy. Light, due to being part of the Celestial Pantheon in a former life. And then Twilight, because she was celestial, now she's infernal, and it's kind of that duality that draws her to Twilight. And then War, because she used to be part of the Celestial Pantheon. And the Celestial Pantheon is largely made up of war gods. Or, not specifically war gods, but Azphyriel kind of formed this new pantheon so that they could go to war with the other gods. Azphyriel is an interesting character that we will get to in the next video. The people that she created are the Felstari. My hand is in the way. Which are heavily inspired by tieflings, because tieflings are my favorite race to play in Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, she created the Felstari. And then her sacred animal are bears. I actually initially did not know which animal to go with. I was bouncing around different ideas. I'm like, what if I did a snake? Because she would be depicted as a snake. And I'm like, no, I think I'm going to give Luciferos the snake. So I thought about Black Cat. I'm like, oh, I really like that idea. Because I love cats. I love black cats. I like to call them little void boys. They're little void babies, but they're void boys. But I'm like, no, I want something that specifically kind of symbolizes rage and also this like protectiveness, like a protective rage. And then, so I looked it up and I'm like, oh, bears. Obviously, Briar. Obviously bears. What is wrong with you? How could you miss that? And it also made me think of the movie Brother Bear, how Kenai's whole arc is that he seeks this bear out for revenge, and then he realizes that, like, the error of his own ways through taking care of Coda. And I'm like, yes, we're going with bears. And then Sphere of Influence, previously healing and mercy, and there is still an element of healing and mercy to her. Because yes, while she represents rage, she also represents closure and the forgotten and the abused. Specifically, So the worship as Azphyriel is technically outlawed in Rusair. Um, and she's kind of an illegal goddess there. And Rusair is kind of where the celestial gods hold the most influence. Teleos is where the old gods hold the most influence. We're going to get into the old gods in later videos, but yeah, so we're gonna, oh no. Sorry. We're gonna get into old gods later. But yeah, the old gods and the primordial gods hold a lot of influence in Teleos, more influence than they hold in Rusair, because Rusair is so focused on the celestial gods, specifically on Rothariel. Anyway. But, though she's outlawed in Rusair, there are a lot of people, especially and quite notably abuse victims, people who were close to somebody who has been murdered, especially in the case of cold cases. And even Astoria, which is so dogmatic in its worship of Rothariel and how many seraphs it has, because seraphs mostly occupy on Rusair the capital city, Rusaris, which is floating above Rusair. We'll get more into that in Rothariel's video as well as all of the seraph politics in Rothariel's video, because he's the one who created the seraphs. We'll get into that. But the political scene in Rusair, or the religious scene in Rusair, even in Astoria, which is like where you would expect people to be most dogmatic about not worshiping Azphyriel, in cases like where a murder case has gone cold and people have largely given up on it, the families will often pay to Azphyriel for some sense of closure, for, just out of grief, out of because she represents the closure. And their kind of helpless rage and their despair, they'll call out to Azphyriel, and she will listen, because she still has those elements of healing and mercy to her. All right, moving on to allies. Tesuer was her wife, and Rothariel built a large part of his discrediting campaign against Azphyriel on the basis of Azphyriel being married to a wild goddess, which eventually trickled down into homophobia in the fact that this was not a natural marriage. Does that sound familiar? It should. That's intentional. I'm not a subtle person. I'm about as subtle as a tornado in a trailer park. So the conclusion is that you're drawing. Anyway. And so he also, there's a lot of purity culture bullshit surrounding the discrediting campaign of Azphyriel, which had started even before he cast her down into the infernal plane. He really fucked over Azphyriel. Next, of course, last video, we talked about her relationship with Arivani. If you haven't watched that video, though, Arivani is the fate spinner, and she has a big focus on self-actualization. And, some people theorize that it's Azphyriel's previous friendship with Arivani through Tesuer that kind of shaped her shift into closure, and the forgotten and abused in her sphere of influence, because Arivani has such a large focus on self-actualization, and your potential, the paths that you may take. So a lot of people in the world itself think that that influenced Azphyriel's shift to specifically closure. And as the author, as the person creating this world, yes, that's exactly what happened. Um, so, moving on to Luciferos. Luciferos is Rothariel's greatest rival. They are the same age. I would say that they are brothers. Twins, in fact. And so when Rothariel cast Azphyriel out, Luciferos took her into his pantheon, largely despite his brother, but also because he kind of understood. He kind of understood the pain that Azphyriel was feeling, and he also wanted a... I haven't fully thought of all of the infernal gods, but he wanted a chill person to mellow them out. And chill is a strong word for Azphyriel. I would not call her chill, but she's more focused. She's more focused. She's not laid back by any means, but she is at least focused, and she knows how to prioritize. And her priority is the people that are hurt by Rothariel, rather than striking back against Rothariel directly. So she's uplifting the hurt and the forgotten and the abused and the broken. Like, that's her main focus, because even in her rage, at heart, she is still a healer. And Luciferos kind of wants some of that on his side, because his side did not have a dedicated healer yet. And then Azphyriel. Azphyriel is one of the primordial gods. I mentioned in the last video that the primordial gods are the original dragons that created the other dragons, and how they're like tied to the plains. Azphyriel is the god of land and all the creatures in it, and it's kind of like a guardianship god. And he and Tasuler were very good friends. Not Tasuler, Azphyriel. He and Azphyriel were very, very good friends. Such good friends, in fact, that that Rothariel, in his discrediting campaign, said that said that Azphyriel was sleeping with not only Azphyriel, but Typhronia as well. Because Typhronia would not fight Azphyriel. Which, Typhronia's thing is just like, it's less affection for Azphyriel and more like, she doesn't like fighting healers. And also, like, Azphyriel and Azphyriel are cool. She's not gonna go beat up her brother's best friend. But Rothariel was able to spin that dynamic, and it's because she's sleeping with them and they're siblings, and that's super gross, and like building a purity culture bullshit situation to harm and discredit Azphyriel. Is this sounding familiar? Good. It's going to sound even more familiar when I get to the Rothariel video. So Rothariel, public enemy number 1. Everybody's got beef with Rothariel. Her title, so she has numerous titles. One of them is the Infernal Mother. Some of the Felstari call her the Felled Star, which is where the Felstari term came from. And then the last title is rather derogatory, used specifically among Rothariel's ilk or his worshippers, and they refer to her as the Dragon Rider. So, lots of shame in their other associations, though, we're just gonna move right on. Other association are roses, because again, Tesuer is called the Sun Rose Dancer. So largely she's associated with roses because of her marriage to Tesuer. When she fell, she was more associated with the thorns of the roses, due to the rage aspect and, you know, wanting to. So the people who understand her and the legends and the myths that surround her and the situation that surrounds her, they associate it with these thorns protecting the flower. And the flower can either be Tesuler, or the flower can symbolize the Felsari. It can symbolize the people who have been abused, downtrodden, the people who have lost their loved ones, specifically to murder, all of that. So the rose, the flower, represents multiple things when it is talked about in the context of Azphyriel and her domain of influence and her story as a whole. She has a single name chosen in the upcoming books, and that is Eolfa Nightsong. Eolfa Nightsong is one of my favorite characters, honestly, as the writer. I don't give her a ton of POVs because she is not a main character. She is a supporting character, a very important supporting character. She serves as the watch captain of Blood Hollow, the starting village where the book takes place. And her younger brother is the town speaker. So every single settlement on Rusair has Seraph presence, overseeing it. And Eolfa is a Seraph, but she's a very low-ranking Seraph because she was only born with 2 eyes. Her younger brother was born with 4 eyes. And your status in the Seraph lineage / regime, we're going to talk about that situation more with Rothariel's video. But your status as a Seraph depends on how many eyes you have. Your power as a Seraph depends on how many eyes you have. How long or short you live depends on how many eyes. We'll get more into it. But Eolfa doesn't have any status because she was born with only 2 eyes. And because of that, she dedicated herself to Blood Hollow and protecting Blood Hollow and being its guardian. And very, very respected in Blood Hollow. Due to story events, she has 2 at the most point of view chapters. And very much later in the first book is when Azphyriel will reach out to Eolfa and choose her as a champion. I'm not going to tell you the context. I'm not going to tell you what happens. But yeah. I really I drew on a lot of my own religious trauma and my own experiences for the inspiration of Azphyriel. So she's very much a goddess that is near and dear to my heart, because if I was in the world, one, I would like to think that I would be a Felsari. Okay, first of all, I love tieflings. But 2, no matter what race I was born as into this world, I like to think that eventually I would find my way to worshiping Azphyriel. And she's gonna have, I'm not gonna say like a huge like direct involvement, but she will be, like, her presence will be felt in this first series that I'm writing in this world pretty heavily. But yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say. I might talk a little bit more about her when I talk about Rothariel, because their stories are so tightly tied together due to the shenanigans that Rothariel has pulled. But other than that, that's kind of all I want to say. So, bye.